Imagine having an useless ability in a world where the abilities you receive at birth determine your value to society. Terrible, right? But that's exactly what happened to Fate, the protagonist of this story. But don't worry, despite his ability seeming like trash and only making Fate feel hungry, IT has a hidden effect that will completely change Fate's life. Come with me to check out this sensational story. Without further ado, let's get to the recap. The anime begins by showing an old man in a cart traveling peacefully. However, this won't last long, since instants later, a large group of goblins begin to chase him, and one of them even manages to climb onto the old man's cart. Desperate, he begins to call for help, hoping that someone could help him. Well, fortunately a group of adventurers were passing by, and immediately they rescue him. They begin defeating the goblins with some ease. Now observe something here with me. Look at the size of this guy, compare his size to the guy next to him riding on horseback. This guy is huge, my friend. He certainly made love with the juice. After that, we go to the city. And here we have the first appearance of Fate, our protagonist. And right off the bat, his stomach rumbles because of his ability called gluttony. At some point, those adventurers from earlier pass in front of Fate talking about their goblin hunt. Fate observes and tells himself that he would never do that. Well, we'll see that he couldn't be more wrong in a while. But for now, Fate continues with his stomach rumbling and dying of hunger while doing his guard job. Thinking, he says he's just a useless guy with a stomach that never stops rumbling, thanks to his ability gluttony that he received at birth. After that, we go to the center of the city where the holy knights are passing by. Despite being nobles, many people do not see them in a good light. Next, 3 holy knights arrive. Raphael, the leader, asks if Fate did a good job in their place while they were away, and the boy promptly confirms. And since he did, Raphael throws Fate's payment on the ground and tells him to pick it up. Here we clearly know who the villains of this story are. Fate does as he is told and bends down to pick up the few coins he received as payment. But when he was picking them up, Raphael waves to Hado and soon the knight steps on Fate's hands. He says that Fate was so dirty that he barely noticed the difference between him and the ground. What a stupid guy. At this moment, Fate's stomach rumbles again. This makes Raphael very angry, as it seems they are not feeding him. And soon Fate begins to be beaten up. While being beaten up, Fate thinks. He says that in that world there are those who have things, and those who do not. And what differentiates them are the special powers given by the gods, called abilities. And meanwhile, Fate continues to be beaten mercilessly, until finally Roxy, another holy knight arrives, and orders them to stop immediately, thus saving Fate. She confronts them saying that this attitude does not match that of the holy knights, who in theory should be the ones protecting the citizen. And she also says that it is their duty to protect the gates, not other people like Fate. Raphael sarcastically says that it is also the duty of the holy knights to provide employment for those who do not have it, and he is only doing Fate a favor. She looks at Fate, still under Hado's boots, and asks if this kind of treatment is really necessary. The scoundrel knight says that this only shows that he and Roxy have different views. And soon he goes away with his henchmen. After that, Roxy immediately runs to help Fate and cleans his wounds. My friends, you can't keep getting screwed forever. At least one good thing happened to him. He thanks Roxy, and she immediately tells them to switch shifts now. And before he leaves, the girl tells him to contact her if this kind of thing happens again. Fate, afraid of reprisals, says it's okay and she shouldn't worry, and after that he leaves. He goes to a bar and eats while thinking about what Roxy said. He is afraid to tell her what is happening because he knows Raphael well. At some point, the bar owner comes to talk to him and says that if he continues like this, he will end up like the other guy who was abused until the end. Fate just finishes eating and pays for the meal. While leaving, Fate continues to rumble. No matter how much he eats, his hunger doesn't go away. You'll find out why in a bit, but let's focus on now. Fate observes some people jumping over the city walls and realizes they are bandits. He doesn't waste time and immediately goes to inform Roxy of what happened. She tells Fate to stay in her place and goes after the scoundrel bandits. She deals with almost all of them, but one of them manages to escape and passes through the gate where Fate was. The boy is without reaction and even thinks about running away. But thinking about it, he says that this would bring problems for Roxy since it happened while she was on guard. And then Fate gathers courage and hits the spear in the belly of the scoundrel bandit. At that moment, something strange happens. After hitting the bandit, a voice says that the gluttony ability has been activated, and Fate's status has increased. In addition, 2 abilities were added, namely Identify and Telepathy. Fate doesn't understand what happened, and soon Roxy comes to see how he is. She takes his hands and asks if he's okay. Upon touching her, the telepathy ability is activated, and Fate can hear her thoughts. But he doesn't say anything, just says he's okay, and that leaves her relieved. After that, she lets go of his hands and says she'll report to her superiors. And at that moment, without touching her, he realizes that he can't hear any more of her thoughts. Fate says yes, it's okay for her to go. He also tells her to take credit for everything, which she thinks is very wrong since he helped by hitting one of them too. Fate explains that if Raphael finds out that he did this, he will probably implicate him, so it's better for her to take all the credit. She understands even so but says she should reward him anyway. And soon she has an idea. She asks Fate what he thinks about working for the Hart family. Fate is reluctant at first but ends up being convinced to accept since his life will be much better there. After that, Fate goes home and checks his status. He notices that now he has triple digits in each of them. In addition, 2 new abilities have appeared. Fate then remembers hearing Roxy's thoughts and imagines that it was the telepathy ability. And then Fate imagines that he has become stronger. And he says that maybe it's time for him to start hunting some monsters. The next day, he goes to a weapons dealer to buy a sword. The dealer asks how much budget he has, and Fate shows 2 silver coins. The dealer gets angry and calls him poor. Fate, thinking, says that's all he got after working for 5 years. Then the dealer says that with what he has, he will only be able to buy some old swords that are in a barrel. Fate thinks it's better than nothing, and he starts picking them up one by one using the identify ability he received earlier, until at some point, he picks up a black sword that he finds interesting. And out of nowhere, the sword speaks to him, which scares him. The sword tells him to buy it, and it will make it worth it. The name of the sword is Greed, and you will soon find out why it is called that. Fate buys it and goes to the fields outside the city to see if he can find some monsters. Soon some goblins appear, and Fate is scared. But despite the scare, he deals with them easily. And with each goblin that was defeated, both his status and abilities were transferred to Fate. Until in the end, he raised his powers a lot, with some status reaching thousands of points, as well as gaining 2 new abilities, one being a low strength improvement and also a low vitality improvement. Then the sword asks him if he is full now, and Fate notes that no, not yet satisfied since you haven't left a like or subscribe to this channel yet. I'm watching you. Subscribe there. Fate notes that for the first time in his life, he feels satisfied and his stomach has stopped growling. At this moment we discover that Fate's gluttony ability is not for food but for souls of living being, a bit macabre isn't it? Fate tells the sword that he thought he would have only the ability he received at birth forever. The sword says that this is normal, but his ability is different from the others. Fate will not gain XP by defeating monsters, but he will take all the status and abilities of those he defeats for himself. Then some adventurers come from afar, and the sword tells Fate to collect the goblin's ears quickly to get the reward at the guild. He must do this quickly, as it would not be good if other people discovered his true powers. And so he does. After receiving his reward, he says he will eat meat since it's been a long time since he's done so. And while walking down the street, he bumps into a suspicious guy who is with a little girl. The guy insults him and tells him to pay attention to where he's going. And at that moment, the little girl touches Fate, and he can hear her calling for help through telepathy. Fate hesitates but decides to go after him to save that girl. He arrives where she is confined and hears the bandit saying that that little girl will be fun for the Holy Knights. And Fate says he will save her at all costs. At some point, the guy moves away, and Fate soon approaches and releases the girl. But it wouldn't be easy like that, would it? The bandit soon appears behind Fate and says that there's always a funny guy wanting to play hero. Fate then takes the girl and takes her to a safe place since holding her wouldn't allow him to fight. After finding a place, he waits for the bandit to approach and knocks down some boxes on him. Then Fate starts fighting seriously. He activates his ability called Sharp Blade and Fate's sword warns him to be careful with that. When the scoundrel attacks, the sword tells Fate to hit the center of the sword, and so he does. As a result, the bandit's sword is split in half, and the thug receives a deep cut to his chest. Then Fate asks who told him to do that, and the guy says he won't snitch on anyone. But Fate takes his sword and puts it inside the cut he made earlier, causing the bandit to feel a lot of pain and be convinced to tell who is behind the kidnapping. Fate discovers that the mastermind behind it is Hado Vlarik, that scoundrel who beat up Fate earlier. Apparently, he also abuses children, hence the kidnappings. "What a disgusting guy, I hope he goes to hell as soon as possible." After that, Fate leaves with the girl and tells her that everything is okay now. And at that moment, the poor girl's stomach growls. Fate then decides to take her to eat, and soon he buys some meat skewers, which makes the girl very happy, since according to her, she had never eaten meat in her life before. After that, Fate takes her to the church where she lives with nuns and other children who were also abandoned. The sister thanks Fate, and he is surprised. She asks why this is so, and Fate replies that he has never been grateful before since he has a weak ability and has always been treated like trash. The little girl asks what it is, and he just says that she only makes him hungry. Then he approaches her and gives an important advice. Fate says that no matter how difficult it is, if you can do everything with a smile on your face, happiness will certainly come one day. And he remembers that one day it was his father who said the same thing to him. After that, he leaves. While walking, he decides he wants to get stronger. Even though he won the previous fight, he had to rely on luck for that, and he doesn't want to depend on it forever. Then he remembers that he has to buy new clothes since tomorrow he starts working at the Hart family's house. And so it happens, early in the morning Fate arrives there, now well-dressed. Right off the bat, Roxy comes to greet him, and Fate is completely paralyzed when he sees her. She asks why, and he replies that she looks beautiful, and that left him speechless. Roxy is embarrassed and says that he looks good in his new clothes. And soon he enters to meet the mansion. Roxy takes him to her father's grave. She tells him that he died recently when he went to Galia, a continent dominated by monsters. And there he found a divine dragon that had not awakened for at least 1,000 years, and this dragon ended up killing his father and his entire army. Fate thinking sees that even in this difficult situation, Roxy was still kind to him and helped him. That's why he must give everything to help her from now on. Then the family governess arrives, and they are introduced. After that, Fate goes to eat, and everyone is impressed with how much meat he can eat, which also makes the governess very angry since he has no manners at all. Some time later, Roxy calls Fate to talk. She asks him if he has gotten used to the job, but Fate doesn't pay attention to what she says. He can only think that he has been getting more and more hungry and doesn't understand why since he has been eating a lot every day. Meanwhile, Roxy keeps calling him Faye repeatedly until he gets scared and she asks what's wrong with him. Fate remembers that his father also called him Faye and he explains it to her. Fate also explains that his father was killed in a monster hunt. Roxy says that it was the same for her, but tells him not to worry since they are now like a family and should take care of each other. Upon hearing this, Fate feels very embarrassed and asks her to call him by his name, but she refuses and says she will keep calling him Faye. But as he spoke, his vision darkens and he faints. That night he wakes up and reads a note left by Roxy. In the letter, she asked him to rest properly. After reading it, he goes to talk to his sword and asks her what happened, since he never felt bad in that way, even after eating a lot. The sword explains to Fate that once he tastes the flavor of a soul, he won't be able to stop consuming them. And it's been a long time since Fate defeated those goblins. She also warns him that if he stays too long without hunting monsters, he may lose control and attack anyone in his way. Fate then wastes no time and goes into the forest to hunt goblins. He kills several, but his hunger is not satisfied. He then decides to enter the forest to find stronger monsters, and so it happened. He soon slaughters several hobgoblins, which are a type of larger and stronger goblin, until finally he feels satisfied. However, while he was thinking of leaving, he sees a giant goblin passing by with a human in his hand. The sword informs him that it is the Goblin King, and his stats are similar to Fate's, so it will be a tough fight. Fate goes after the big guy and has difficulty fighting him, but fortunately, he manages to find an opening and slays the goblin. Now Fate has double the stats he had before, and the sword says that with those numbers Fate would be able to use his new form. However, the cost for this is to give up all the stats he has gained until today. Fate is reluctant, but remembers that without her, he would have nothing and would continue to be treated like trash by the knights. And so he decides to give all his points to the sword. And thus she activates her greed ability, steals all of Fate's points, and soon his second form is shown. She takes the form of a bow and tells Fate to test her. Fate doesn't know how to use it, and she just tells him to do it as if he were pulling an imaginary arrow and releasing it. And she also says that no matter where he aims, the arrow will always hit the target he chose. And so he does, and easily slays one of the hobgoblins that was nearby. After that, he returns to the city and leaves the ears of the Goblin King at the church door, saying that by selling them they can eat for a good while. Shall we? One morning, Fate sees a strange girl leaving the Heart Mansion and asks her brusquely who she is. When the girl turns around, she reveals herself as Roxy, and Fate is startled. She gets angry and says he scared her. Fate explains that he didn't recognize her because her clothes are quite different from her usual attire. Fate then asks where she's going dressed like that. She whispers to Fate that she's going to the city for a secret inspection and tells him not to tell anyone because if Haru, the housekeeper, finds out, she's in trouble. Fate says he understands and goes back to his work. But as he's about to leave, the girl grabs him by the collar and says she has an idea. She gives him a confidential mission to accompany her as an escort. And so it happens, they head to the city, and Roxy seems quite happy. If I didn't know everything, I'd almost say they're on a date, but let's continue. Roxy walks through the city, and at one point, Fate calls her Roxy-sama. Immediately, she tells him to stop and says that if he calls her that, people will recognize her. Detail, she hasn't changed her face at all, just her clothes, and she thinks she's completely disguised, reminds me of a certain hero with tight pants. She suggests that he call her Rocky, quite different, right? Meanwhile, Fate's sword teases the situation, and he tells it to shut up. However, Roxy doesn't know he's talking to the sword and thinks he told her to be quiet. Fate is quite dense, isn't he? He tries to explain himself and says it's all right. Strangely, it works, and Roxy is in a good mood again. She says she's excited about the idea of the two of them going out together and gives him a beautiful smile. His sword plays along with the situation, and Fate tells it to shut up again. At that moment, Roxy says she won't allow him to treat his weapon with such violence, and Fate apologizes. Then, Roxy mentions that she's never really looked at Fate's sword. Fate becomes concerned because it's not normal for someone with a seemingly useless ability like his to have a sword. At one point, Fate accidentally drops his sword, but before it hits the ground, Roxy catches it. She takes a good look at his sword and says it's really beautiful. Roxy tells him that he should take better care of the sword and mentions that she'll take him to the Hart family's blacksmith for maintenance soon. After that, they continue walking through the city. Roxy and Fate explore all the stalls and even taste some grapes that Fate finds very delicious. At this point, Roxy slips up and mentions that the grapes are grown at her home. The merchant finds it strange, but with the help of his sword, Fate helps her get out of the situation. He says that Roxy's family works for the Hart family, and that's why she lives near the vineyard. The merchant understands, and Roxy thanks Fate for saving her. At that moment, a holy night passes by, and as always, the people are not very receptive to them. As he passed by, Fate's stomach rumbles, attracting his attention. He asks who did that, and immediately goes in Fate's direction. The boy apologizes and bows, but before the knight could kick him, Roxy tells him to stop. She says Fate has already apologized, and now the conniving knight's attention turns to her. He asks who she is, and upon closer inspection, he says her face isn't strange and starts to remember. One of the nearby people asks if she isn't Roxy, and Fate, with the help of his sword, pretends that they are a couple. Immediately, they get closer, and Roxy starts inventing a story, saying that he didn't eat the breakfast she prepared for him. Fate goes along with it, acting as if they were a couple, successfully diverting any suspicions that the girl might be Roxy. After apologizing again, they leave, and everyone says it's impossible for that to be Roxy because, to everyone there, holy knights can't cook. After that, Fate and Roxy head to an alley, and she continues to stick close to him. Fate can hear her thoughts thanks to his telepathy ability. Fate sees that Roxy is somewhat embarrassed about clinging to a man's arm, but she also reveals that her heart is pounding. After hearing this, Fate lets her go and apologizes. Roxy says it's okay, and she's already used to it. While they walk, Roxy asks if Fate knows any warriors. Fate asks why, and at that moment, they hear people talking about a monster that's killing all the goblins, which piques Roxy's interest. She goes to inquire, wanting to know more details. However, they say they don't know much and suggest she ask an adventurer. She then asks Fate to take her to where the warriors are. He agrees, and they head to a tavern to gather information. Upon arriving, the tavern owner is very surprised because, to him, Fate was supposed to be dead. Fate and Roxy sit down, and he introduces Roxy by the name of Rocky. The tavern owner expresses his surprise at Fate's reappearance, especially with a girlfriend. Fate feels embarrassed, and Roxy also becomes somewhat nervous and embarrassed, to the point where she breaks the glass she was holding. After Fate's sword teases him, he also ends up breaking his glass. Then they have a little to eat while the guy shares what he knows about the goblin monster. According to him, an adventurer went to kill some goblins to make some money and found a pile of corpses with their ears still intact, suggesting that it might have been another monster. Adventurers collect goblin ears to bring to the guild and claim their rewards. Little do they know that the one responsible for all of this is right there, with that dumbfounded look on his face. The tavern owner also mentions that this could be bad for business since the trade route passes close to where the attacks are happening. With a possible monster on the loose, many people won't want to take the risk, which would weaken the local economy. They suspect it might be a lich, which is kind of like a restless soul. An old man at the tavern says that adventurers will form a group to go after the big creature. At this point, other adventurers enter the tavern, and one of them comes to Roxy and invites her to have some fun. Little do they know that she's a holy knight. Fate quickly stands up and tells them to stop. Roxy also stands up, and with a simple move, she sends the Joker flying. At this moment, they realize that she is Roxy, and they quickly kneel before her, asking for forgiveness. She says it's alright and tells them to get up. She explains that knights should protect the citizens, and seeing the population so afraid of them is something that embarrasses her. They say she's just like her father and a good person. After that, they all have fun, and Roxy wins in an arm wrestling contest against everyone. Later, Fate and Roxy go to the Hart family's blacksmith, who gives Fate's sword some maintenance, which makes the sword very happy. Fate thanks the blacksmith and asks Roxy why she doesn't have any information about the monster. Roxy explains that the Vlarik family is controlling the information and not sharing anything with her, so she had to investigate on her own. At this moment, they hear the voice of Hado, that conniving knight, causing a commotion in the city. When they arrive, they see that he's holding a child, and as we've seen before, this guy likes to have fun with children. Roxy arrives and tells him to stop. The Shady Knights claim they're just taking a lost child for their protection. Yeah, right. Fate steps forward and makes Hado let go of the child. They take the boy, and Roxy says she'll take care of him. Before leaving, Hado tries to start trouble with Fate, but his leader tells him to stop and follow. Afterward, Fate and Roxy take the boy to eat and quickly find his mother, who thanks them for protecting her son. Later, Fate asks his sword for a way to hunt monsters without being recognized. The sword suggests using a mask that prevents him from being recognized, an enchanted item that makes him appear different to anyone who sees him. After that, Fate buys a raw ore and gives it to Roxy as a thank you gift for their day together. But he says he doesn't know if there's any gem inside and asks her to open it. Of course, he used his identification ability and already knew everything. When Roxy opens it, she finds a beautiful gem inside and is very happy with the gift. The next day, Roxy invites Fate to accompany her on a trip. They go to the Hart family's cultivation lands, where the grapes they tasted in the city are produced. When they arrive, Roxy's mother welcomes them. She asks who the boy with her is. Roxy introduces him and says he's the new employee she hired, and she brought him to introduce him to everyone. Her mother's name is Aisha Hart. She calls Fate over and asks if he likes Roxy. At this point, Roxy becomes very embarrassed, and her mother simply says she wants to know Fate's opinion of her. Fate replies that he does like Roxy very much and even adds that he would like to serve her for the rest of his life. This leaves the girl very embarrassed, and she quickly runs away. Later, Fate helps with the grape harvest along with Roxy. While talking to other employees, Fate learns that Roxy always comes there at this time of year because the kobolds come after the ripe grapes and end up destroying the plantation. Roxy comes to deal with them and never lets them endanger anyone. At this moment, Fate's stomach growls, and he doesn't understand why since he recently hunted many goblins. The sword explains that perhaps his gluttony ability is craving souls of other monsters besides goblins. After they finish harvesting the grapes, Roxy tells Fate to go back without her because she has something to do. While he's walking, he passes by a girl with a big axe. When he passes by, the girl talks to him, and Fate notices that her eyes are just like his. She says it seems like she arrived too early and tells Fate he can keep the kobolds. But she also says that Fate owes her one, and they will meet again soon. They better keep an eye on her. I have a strong feeling that this girl will be very important to the story. After that, Roxy arrives and comes to talk to Fate. Fate asks who that girl is, and Roxy doesn't know, but she says that it's clear she's a Gallian, someone born on the continent of Gallia, where Roxy's father died. Roxy explains that the place used to be prosperous before the arrival of the monsters that completely destroyed the country. Now, it's extremely rare to find a Gallian, but there are still some of them out there, like that girl. After that, Fate asks if Roxy will be fine hunting the kobolds alone and offers to help if needed. In response, she says there's no problem since she has several other warriors with her. The next day, they go to the vineyard and notice that a part of it has been completely destroyed by the kobolds. They decide to go for reconnaissance to discover the location of the kobold group. They easily find them, but something different from the usual is happening. In addition to the regular kobolds that appear every year, there's a kind of boss among them, an evolved monster much stronger than the regular ones. Fate checks his stats and notices that he's level 50 and has incredibly strong stats. Then they return, and the people in the village are worried because there's nothing they can do against that monster. Roxy, on the other hand, says she will dedicate herself to protecting everyone there. While she was speaking, Fate's sword says it's impossible for her to do it alone. Fate now has no alternative, he must help. That night, he goes into the forest and heads to where the kobolds are. He grabs his sword and uses its second form, the bow we've seen before. Fate starts shooting and kills them one by one. This causes his stats to rise rapidly. He switches the sword back to its normal form and advances, beating down the creatures. However, his stats are still not enough to fight the boss. Fate goes on to kill the remaining normal kobolds, and now there's no way around it, he has to fight the boss. Fate goes after him and notices that the boss is using a dangerous ability with his fists, capable of penetrating armor to break bones and pulverize organs. He must be careful. The boss attacks, and Fate falls into the creek. The boss continues to attack Fate, but the boy manages to eliminate the last of the creatures surrounding the boss. With this, Fate can use an enhanced form of the bow, and he does so. Fate charges a powerful attack and shoots it at the boss, completely defeating him and leaving a huge trail of destruction. At this moment, Fate's gluttony ability is activated. As he obtained a massive amount of power by absorbing the boss kobold's stats, he might lose control. The sword tells him to control himself since if he loses control, he could become a bloodthirsty beast. The next day, Roxy and her group go to the location where the kobolds were, but they only find their corpses and a massive trail of destruction left by Fate's attack. She wonders who could have done this and returns home. Talking with her mother and Fate, she reports what she found when she got there. Fate acts as if he doesn't understand, and Roxy starts to suspect that it might be that Gallian girl they encountered the other day, as Gallians are known for being very strong. Later, Roxy's mother calls Fate to her room and makes a request to him, but don't get the wrong idea. She says she would like him to stay by her daughter's side to support her. Seeing her unwell, Fate readily accepts her request and says he will always stand by Roxy. And soon after, they leave. That night, Fate goes to look for more goblins to satisfy his hunger. However, as expected, the goblins no longer satisfy him. His eye remains red, indicating that he needs new souls. Fate starts using an eye patch and goes to the bar he always visits. There, he learns that the knights are going on a new expedition to Gallia, the same place where Roxy's father went and ultimately died. Fate becomes worried because Roxy will probably have to go too. Later, Roxy goes to her father's grave to tell him that she has also been assigned to the expedition to Gallia. At that moment, Fate appears and asks her not to do it, as she might not come back from there. But the girl is determined to go, and there's nothing Fate can do. He then decides to get stronger to be able to protect her. While he hunts monsters to get stronger, Hado and a group of adventurers find him and ask if he's the monster people are talking about. Fate and Hado stand face to face, and the deceitful knight still doesn't know it's him. Hado commands his lackeys to attack from the front, and obviously, Fate handles them all effortlessly. Now, there are only a few cowards left who quickly flee, and him, the sacred knight Hado Vlerick, who thinks highly of himself. Fate steps closer, observing Hado's expression. If he isn't scared witless right now, I'm a 0.7 mechanical pencil. The deceitful knight wields his sword, and look at how it's trembling. Yep, things are about to heat up. But Fate doesn't just want to eliminate him. He wants revenge for all the suffering this scoundrel put him through and to make him know who's doing this. So Fate removes his mask and reveals himself. Hado, upon seeing who's responsible for all this, asks him how a worthless guy like him has such power. Yep, he's not helping himself there. Fate simply states there's no need to explain, and Hado calls him insolent, warning that he won't get away with this. And folks, look here, I think Hado has developed a case of the shakes, can he be afraid? Even though he's terrified, he claims to be the eldest of the Vlarik family, and Fate will have to deal with him. After the small talk, Fate analyzes Hado's stats, and well, he's not that bad. Besides his stats, he has the Sacred Sword Technique ability, a trait only those with that skill can become Sacred Knights. Finally, the fight begins. Hado is extremely arrogant and immediately uses an ability against Fate, but Fate dodges and quickly appears behind Hado. The big guy attempts to react by attacking Fate with his sword. However, as he strikes the boy, his sword is easily sliced in half. And now things get tough for him. Fate slowly approaches, and the knight starts backing off, visibly terrified. Fate recalls a phrase Hado once said, about how disobedient dogs need to be disciplined. At that moment, Fate grabs Hado by the collar and hurls him with force towards a tree. But that's not all, Fate continues by using him to knock down several trees. The deceitful knight ends up completely battered, pleading for Fate to stop. Maybe now you're starting to feel sorry for him, right? But let me remind you what this scoundrel has done. Aside from beating Fate every day, this scoundrel kidnapped children for his amusement, if you catch my drift. Yes, he deserves all of this and much more. For Fate, everything this guy has done isn't enough. He remembers that because of Hado and the other deceitful knights, Roxy is heading on an extremely dangerous mission. Fate, upon hearing his cries for help, becomes completely enraged and throws him up. He uses the second form of his weapon and shoots at Hado multiple times as he falls. The shots tear off the Sacred Knight's arms and legs. He asks why Fate hasn't killed him yet, and the boy states he has one question to ask. He confirms that she decided to go to Gallia on her own, and Fate thinks she would indeed do that to save her people. At that moment, Fate positions his sword above Hado, preparing for the final blow. The knight pleads, asking to be spared, but Fate has already made up his mind. He finishes the knight off, avenging all the wrongs done to him. Fate's ability is activated, and his stats skyrocket, some reaching up to 500,000 points. The sword mentions that with his current stats, he can reach its second level. Fate says it's fine, the sword can take the attributes since he doesn't want anything from someone as despicable as Hado. And so, it happens, now reaching its level 2. Upon reaching this level, it takes the form of a scythe, capable of cutting through anything and anyone. After that, we see Roxy leaving her home, heading for her expedition to Gallia. She's beloved by all, and everyone bids her farewell, including Fate. She leaves, and right after, Fate decides to live as a warrior from now on. But, of course, this is just an excuse to leave the mansion. Fate has decided to shadow Roxy to protect her from any danger. Fate then embarks on his journey to Gallia. He hitches a ride on a carriage and continues traveling. Meanwhile, we see two girls, apparently scientists, investigating the bodies of monsters killed by the monster that roamed the city. We already know that's Fate, right? One of the girls, examining the cuts, notices they're not ordinary and becomes quite intrigued. She grabs a book on weapons and finds a possible bow that could cause that kind of damage. She realizes this was certainly caused by a weapon of the 7 deadly sins, and now, the name, Greed, for Fate's weapon makes sense. We're back to Fate, and he soon arrives at Tetra, his first stop on the journey to Gallia. Fate recounts that he used to live in this city during his childhood, while his father was still alive. To him, the city hasn't changed at all. Fate heads to a tavern to eat and rest a bit. Upon arrival, he finds a man seeking help from some adventurers. He mentions that his village is under attack and is willing to pay, but apparently, the adventurers aren't too keen on the idea. They start mistreating the boy, but Fate intervenes and stops them, much to the adventurers' displeasure. They try to strike Fate, who just holds back one of their punches and orders them to leave. The boy expresses gratitude, but before he finishes speaking, Fate calls him Set. At that moment, the boy recognizes him, triggering a flashback for Fate. It recalls Set and other kids bullying him for his constant hunger pangs. They'd throw stones and torment Fate in various ways. One day, monsters attacked the village, and Fate's father promptly went to fight them. However, in one of those battles, Fate's father perished, leaving Fate alone. Because Fate couldn't help and was always hungry, the village leader expelled him, calling him useless and trash. Back to Fate, Set begs for help, stating that the village is being attacked by monsters and will soon be completely destroyed. Well, Fate has every reason in the world to refuse those who stoned him and didn't accept him after his father died. But our protagonist is still quite kind and decides to help. They head to the village, and immediately, Set's father encounters Fate. He asks what trash like him is doing in that village, what a stupid guy. They completely disregard fate and mention using him as a sacrifice to buy time. Look at these guys' ideas, man. Fate doesn't pay much attention and goes to Set's house. Set apologizes for his father's behavior. Fate assures him it's alright, and he's used to it. During this time, Fate talks with Set and discovers that Set's wife was taken by the monsters, leaving only him and his daughter. Set also admits that he used to believe his father was right, but since his daughter was born, he realized he was wrong. While conversing, Fate feels hungry, and Set goes to prepare something to eat. At this moment, the little girl approaches Fate and gives him a candy to eat. Pay close attention to this candy, you'll see why in a bit. Fate eats a lot, but suddenly starts feeling weak and ends up fainting. Set asks if he ate something different, and the girl mentions giving him a sweet at her grandfather's request. Set realizes that his father set up everything to make Fate a sacrifice to the monsters when they attacked the village. Yep, remember when Mom used to say not to accept sweets from strangers? There's the reason. Be careful. At this moment, Set hears some noises and looks out the window. He notices that the monster attack has begun, and it's chaos outside. Fate remains unconscious, and the monsters are approaching. There are dozens and dozens of monsters. Things are getting wild out there. Houses are on fire, monsters are attacking people. Fate needs to wake up urgently. Set quickly rushes to prepare a type of antidote that works well. Soon, Fate wakes up and grasps the situation. He tells Set to take cover and rushes out to combat the creatures. Fate then uses the scythe form and starts deflecting the attacks of the gargoyles. After defeating the smaller ones, he manages to absorb the fireball ability. Now, only the leader remains, a rather large gargoyle. It charges an attack and heads towards Fate, but he easily manages to cut it in half and defeat the big one. Fate returns to speak with Set, who informs him that his father died, and only a few villagers survived. Before Fate leaves, Set expresses a desire to receive a beating from Fate. Quite the troublemaker. According to him, that's the only way for him to pay for what he did to Fate in the past. Fate's sword advises him that it's better to comply with Set's request since that's the only way he'll feel that justice has been served for Fate. Fate agrees and asks Set to turn away. Fate lands a punch, and the boy falls to the ground. Fate asks if he's okay, and Set confirms. Afterward, Fate instructs him to take good care of his daughter and heads to his father's grave. He recalls the good times he had with his father and resolves to be alright from now on. Fate accepts a job to escort a carriage, and as payment, he'll travel for free to his destination, the next city on the way to Gallia. In the middle of the journey, some bandits appear ahead and demand they hand over everything or face the consequences. The carriage owner panics and asks Fate for help, but before Fate could do anything, a giant axe falls from the sky, creating a massive cloud of dust and defeating all the bandits, who are sent flying. We find out that the girl we saw earlier caused this. She mentions that Fate owes her for those kobolds she left for him. She approaches and says she needs a ride, and obviously, seeing what she's capable of, the carriage owner agrees to take her. As they entered, the carriage tipped under the weight of her axe. That's when it became apparent that she could control its weight effortlessly, making it lighter and bringing the carriage back down. Her axe's name was Sloth, and now things started to make sense. Fate's weapon was named Greed, his skill Gluttony, and the girl's axe was named Sloth. All of them were named after the 7 deadly sins. As they traveled, they introduced themselves. Her name was Mine, and her ability was Wrath. While they chatted, the girl's stomach growled. Fate offered her some jerky, not expecting her to eat it all. Eventually, they arrived in the city where an outdoor performance was taking place. A girl was attacked by ghosts, and a holy knight defeated them, saving the girl. Here, knights were revered, unlike in Fate City. At that moment, the carriage owner mentioned that Roxy's expedition was approaching. Fate realized he was ahead of her on the way to Gallia, which made sense since she was with a large group of warriors, naturally slowing down the journey. The merchant paid Fate for escorting the carriage, but Mine collected all the coins. She claimed she defeated the bandits and also brought up Fate owing her for the kobold she left for him. Now, Fate was seen carrying Mine. Apparently, she was a night person and ended up quite sleepy during the day. As they walked, Fate noticed people had marks on their necks. Apparently, each social class had a different mark. Moving forward, Fate went to an inn. He got a room for himself and Mine, placing the girl in bed to rest. While she slept, Greed, the sword, spoke with Fate. It claimed familiarity with Mine and her axe. Greed explained that Sloth was like him, an axe of the 7 deadly sins. He mentioned that besides the 4 present, there were still Lust, envy, and pride. It complemented, saying these abilities were born to challenge God's established laws. Among them, gluttony was particularly sinful, with the potential to disrupt the divine leveling system. Once gluttony tasted souls, there was no stopping it. Hence, Fate needed to keep killing monsters forever. Speaking of which, Fate remembered he had to hunt monsters. He went to a remote area outside the city and defeated some particularly strong monsters. Then, we returned to mine. She woke up and went to look for something to eat. While wandering the inn, she spotted a poster that read, "Whoever defeats the sand golem will be rewarded." One of the guys nearby said not even the holy knights could do that. And guess who whacked a bunch of those monsters? Yes, our dear protagonist. Back to Fate, he continued smashing the golems. Until, at a certain point, a group of adventurers was attacked by one, facing grave danger. But the day was saved by the Powerpuff Girls. Wait, no, by Fate. He diverted the monster's attention towards him and, with his bow, began hammering the big thing. It retaliated and attacked Fate too. Fate resisted well and devised a plan to defeat it. He used the evolved bow and fired a strong attack at the core of the monster, completely defeating it. After that, the adventurers thanked Fate, who said there was no need, and then left. When he returned to the room, he found Mine like that, semi-nude. He asked her what she was doing, and the girl, very calmly, said there was no need to be embarrassed, as Fate was just a child. Fate said he was the one feeling embarrassed, and Mine teased him, saying he was having lewd thoughts. After she got dressed, Fate asked where she was going. The girl replied that she was going to defeat the sand golem. Fate told her he had already done it. The girl was furious since she wouldn't get her reward. Desperate, Fate told her to calm down and said she could have half. While they received the reward, the holy knight of the city approached them. The scoundrel said that if Fate defeated the sand golems, something even he couldn't do, now both of them should serve him. Mine stepped forward, saying it was impossible, as Fate already belonged to her. He asked who she was, saying a little girl like her should be at home sucking on her mother's thumb. Well, he couldn't have chosen worse words. The girl simply sent him flying through the air, just like you're seeing there. After that, she and Fate ran out of the city to avoid trouble. Fate and Mine are journeying towards Galia. Along the way, they stop at a village on their route. This village sits close to a castle that harbors a mystery that you'll soon discover. Mine leads the way, with Fate following behind. Upon arrival, Fate surveys the village, commenting on its seemingly tranquil atmosphere. His sword, however, indicates their proximity to Galia and the strong influence of monsters in the area. Greed also suggests that there might be someone incredibly strong protecting this village to maintain such peace. Fate then inquires about the castle. The sword suggests it's likely Hausa, considering their location. While walking, Fate notices an old man taking care of his sword and asks him about the village's leader, expressing a desire to request permission to stay for a few days. At that moment, the old man reveals himself as the village leader. Upon turning around, Fate's sword quickly recognizes him as a sacred sword, hinting that he might be a sacred knight defending the village against monster attacks. The old man turns and expresses that before anything else, he'd like to have a duel with Fate, and afterward, they'll decide if he can stay. Fate, having no real choice, agrees, and they draw their swords for the duel. The duel begins, and the old man easily overpowers Fate. The boy asks if this means he cannot stay, but contrary to his expectations, the old man says it's not quite so. In fact, he mentions that perhaps this meeting has a purpose, and hence, he'll let Fate stay for a while. However, he imposes a condition: while Fate is there, he must train with him. Fate asks why, but the old man simply says it's because he feels like it. He adds that Fate doesn't know how to prevent using his identification and lacks complete control over his abilities. He implies that Fate's body isn't accustomed to his immense strength, as if he gained too much power suddenly, which we know is quite true. Fate finds it odd that the old man offers this without asking for anything in return but ends up accepting it anyway. Fate introduces himself and expresses his reliance on the old man. The old man introduces himself as Aaron Barbados. Shortly after, Mine arrives, saying she found a place for them to camp, but Fate claims he already found a place for them to stay. The next morning, Fate and Aaron begin their training early. The old man instructs Fate to prepare himself and immediately notices his flawed posture. Aaron wastes no time in meticulously correcting Fate's stance. After that, he starts demonstrating practically how Fate should perform. Fate finds it incredible and gets highly excited about the training. While training, Fate's hunger starts demanding more souls, his eyes turning red. As we know, in this state, Fate becomes faster and stronger. This leaves Eren impressed, and they continue training until the day ends. While returning from training, Fate senses the smell of monsters coming from the castle and wonders why that might be. And soon enough, we'll find out. That night, Eren gazes at the castle with a hint of sadness. It seems he has a strong connection to that place. The day breaks, and Fate's training continues. This time, Eren uses his sword, handing a simple stick to Fate for defense. A bit unfair, right? But there's a reason for this. According to Eren, Fate will manage, and he promptly attacks the boy. Surprisingly, Fate manages to deflect Eren's attack using the branch, and the old man acknowledges his skill. He also mentions that Fate can now control his stats much better. Afterward, they go to eat, and Fate expresses gratitude for everything. While conversing, Eren once again looks at the castle through the window. Fate asks if there's something about the castle, and Eren begins to share about it. The old man explains that it used to be his castle, but 15 years ago, it was attacked by a lich, resulting in him losing his people and family. Since then, the castle has been taken over, leaving Eren to defend the villagers from occasional monster attacks. At this moment, Fate's ability is again at its limit, craving new souls to satisfy its hunger. Fate decides to head to the castle, but outside, Eren interrupts and declares he'll accompany. He says it's a chance for him to forget the past. Quickly, Mine volunteers to stay in the village and protect the villagers, but of course, our little mercenary wouldn't do that for free. She asks what he thinks of paying her 50 gold coins for this. Fate and Eren head towards the castle. Strangely, upon arrival, they find the place fully preserved despite 15 years passing. However, despite its preservation, numerous undead are in the castle. The initial ones are easily defeated, and they proceed further. As they ascend, Eren encounters his old family, which makes no sense since they all died in the incident 15 years ago, yet they appear exactly as they were then. Eren is emotional upon seeing his son and wife. Fate already suspects this to be an illusion, and greed confirms it. At a certain point, Eren's son tries to attack him, but the old man is savvy to the situation. He defends against the attack, and a battle between him and his family ensues. Fate tries to help, but Eren insists on handling family matters himself and instructs Fate to deal with the lich somewhere in the castle. While Eren fights his son, Fate encounters the big baddie responsible for all of this, whose stats are ridiculously high. The big guy is powerful, but Fate starts using the skills he learned from Eren to fight him. Fate begins to strategize on how to defeat him, and at that moment, Eren arrives to lend a hand. The old man seems determined and uses a powerful ability against all the undead there. Meanwhile, Fate assists him. The boy takes Eren's sword and uses the Grand Cross ability to purge all the undead from the area. Afterward, Eren can bid a proper farewell to his wife and son. Eren informs that even being very old, he managed to surpass his level limit in that fight, probably due to fighting alongside Fate. Eren also mentions that there's still a horde of monsters they need to deal with. After handling everything, they return to Mine, and Eren pays the 50 coins she requested. He pays her, and as always, she states that the money is for rebuilding her village. At that moment, Eren mentions that he saw her exactly as she is now, 50 years ago, surprising Fate since she still looks quite young. When asked who she is, Mine simply states that she's a ghost who isn't allowed to die. Then, Eren talks to Fate, noticing the boy's eyes returning to normal. Fate explains that there's a special condition that keeps them like that and that he needs to hunt monsters to return to normal. Eren then tells Fate to return once he completes his objective on this journey. At that moment, we revisit the Vlarik family, and Raphael and his sister receive news that Hato has vanished, leaving them furious. Back to Fate, he continues his journey with Mine. Fate starts complaining that she eats too much and mentions that their supplies received from Eren are almost depleted. But the girl doesn't pay much attention and ends up sleeping on Fate's lap. Meanwhile, Roxy arrives at the village Fate was in earlier and soon seeks out Eren, who is a sacred knight just like Roxy. It's revealed that he already knew her, as her father was very close to him. In fact, Eren was the one who chose Roxy's name. Eren mentions that she must know the reason he retired, and Roxy confirms, stating that she sees the Lord Lich has already been defeated. Eren confirms but says it wasn't done alone. He mentions it was thanks to a warrior who fought alongside him. Roxy asks for the name of this warrior, but Eren says he asked for confidentiality and can't reveal it. Roxy understands and apologizes for the intrusion. After this, Roxy bids farewell. Before she leaves, Eren asks if she's heading to Gallia, and the girl confirms. Eren warns her to be very careful since the Vlerick family is very cunning and probably has set up a trap for her in Gallia. Despite that, the girl insists she'll fulfill her father's wish. Eren is surprised to learn his friend has passed away. Upon hearing this, Eren offers to train Roxy just like he did with Fate. He says he'll do this to prepare her as much as possible for her tough mission. Roxy accepts and spends a few days training with Eren. Afterward, we return to Fate and Mine. She continues onward and spots a giant cocoon up ahead. We're told it's a chimera, a biological weapon tested by Gallia's army in the past. Essentially, they take a container and stitch monsters inside to merge them. Greed says they should all be inactive, but this one isn't. It's more active than the subscribe button you haven't clicked yet. Help me out, subscribe, and drop that like. Mine says it's time for Fate to pay her back for everything she's done. Basically, the two of them will fight the monster emerging from within. Mine says she needs Fate's ability to consume souls to defeat this big guy, the one you're seeing here, essentially a Megazord with a girl inside the core. After studying the monster a bit, they go for it. The big guy is tough, launching attacks at them. Mine uses her axe to counter a lava attack and manages to rip off one of the creature's arms. But it's futile as it quickly regenerates the lost limb. Mine keeps attacking, and the monster reveals its second form. Now it has wings and flies. Fate gets annoyed at needing protection again but is motivated to fight alongside Mine. Fate then enters a hunger state, and things get intense. The Chimera launches feather attacks, but they easily defend against them. Then, Fate jumps and unleashes a powerful attack on the creature, petrifying it. Mine follows up with her attack. Unfortunately, before they can finish it off, it seals itself in a sort of black sphere. Fate decides to use his scythe to cut through, but ironically, it doesn't pierce the barrier. Greed tells him to focus on the mana flow and hit the densest spot. Fate follows the instruction, managing to pierce the protection. But he falters, letting the Chimera escape by flying away. Mine says they're out of time and instructs Fate to hop on her axe. Fate doesn't get it but ends up complying. After he gets on, she hurls him upwards at incredible speed, and the boy goes straight for the Chimera, defeating it with a powerful attack. After that, Fate has a vision showing some children seemingly in an experiment. One of these children is Raniel, the same girl who was inside the Chimera. We see that Mine had some closeness with her, but we don't know more. After defeating the Chimera, Mine makes an improvised grave for her friend. Despite all this, Mine says she lost her memories and just did what she thought was right. At this moment, Fate makes a request. He says that if he ever loses control of his powers, he'd like Mine to kill him to prevent any danger to others. At that moment, the girl gives Fate a strong hug and says it's okay. When that happens, she'll send him off. Then, the two bid farewell. Mine says there are still things to do, and Fate says he's heading to the city of Babylonia. He asks what she'll do. The girl says she promised to create a village, and that's what she'll work on. She also feels that the next time they meet, he'll be dead. Obviously, he's taken aback, but forgets everything when his weapon reaches level 3 and gains a new form, the magical shield, just like you're seeing on the screen. We know that Fate loses all his stats when his weapon levels up, so he asks Mine to help him until he recovers his stats. She agrees, but we're talking about Mine here. The girl will obviously charge some gold coins for her services. Finally, Fate arrives in Babylonia, a fortified city built to withstand attacks from Gallia's monsters. Upon entering, Fate looks for food but is shocked by the prices. According to him, they're 5 times higher than in the capital, which is obvious. Because that place is very dangerous, and few merchants risk it, and those who do charge much more for their goods. At that moment, it's announced that Roxy's group has arrived in the city, and soon a girl appears behind Fate. This girl claims that Roxy will die there in that city. Does she know something? We'll find out in the next video. Did you enjoy it? Then help me out with your like and subscribe here on the channel. Seriously, that helps me a lot. And to reward you for that, I've left an amazing video here on the final screen. It tells the story of Desir Herman, a wizard who failed to save the world. But when he thought it was his end, instead of dying, he went back 13 years in the past and will use that opportunity to try and save as many people as possible. It's amazing. Click on the screen and go check it out, alright? I'm heading out, and until next time.